All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this week's Office Hours. My name is George Soto, one of the co-founders here at AssetMule, joined by my co-founder Justin Dorfman and CEO. And of course, we are super thrilled today to be joined by a rock star product marketing expert, Shoshana Kordova. I got that right. Right.
Yes.
So 'cause I was saying Cordoba because it's for southern Spain. Actually, I didn't mention this when we were prepping. Was that my parents met in southern Spain in Sevilla? So my dad was a
Oh, okay.
yeah. So my dad was a Franciscan monk in Sevilla, and then my mom was studying there. So, anyways, for the folks out there, in case they're curious about my origins. Speaking of origins and in really important information, today we're going to be diving into the topic of how to turn your customer interviews into go to market gold. Shoshana is a expert at the topic, so we're going to walk through some of your concepts and framework. And of course, for the folks out there, if you have any questions or comments or feedback, I'm going to be monitoring the comments section. You're probably watching this on LinkedIn or YouTube. So be sure to add those to that section. If it's a super urgent question, we'll get to it. Otherwise, we'll have a Q&A at the end. Although Shoshana, I think we really like getting the crowd and or the audience involved. So we'll kind of monitor those things. So without further ado, maybe you can tell folks a little bit about yourself, and then maybe start to kind of walk through that customer insights template.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Shoshana, and I originally started my career in journalism. I was working in journalism for over a decade. I had no idea that product marketing was a thing. I'd never heard of it. Then I kind of took the gateway drug of content marketing, switched from journalism to marketing for high tech. Was in content marketing for a while, then started looking for a new job. And I see all these like product marketing roles on LinkedIn. And I'm like, I don't know what this is, but it sounds like maybe I could do it. And that is how I got into product marketing. And once I got into it, I started realizing how many similarities there really are to journalism. And I think that's one of the reasons I like product marketing so much is because, you know, a lot of marketing kind of gets a bad rap as being a little fluffy, right? And I sort of feel like product marketing is the least fluffy part of marketing. And it's because it's like it's based in the facts on the ground, which is what does the product do and what are the product capabilities. But on the other side of that equation, you've also got what does the market need. And so I kind of just started using my, research skills to understand both sides of that equation. What does the product do? What does the market need? And how do those things fit together? And I think that one of the best ways to understand that is through interviewing customers.
That's awesome. I think journalism is such a great background for product marketing in general, but definitely that side of product marketing. I think I've told you this story, Shoshana, but I started in sales, right? And I feel like when I first got into product marketing, I really leaned heavily on sales enablement and demos and creating content. And it actually wasn't until I became a founder that I really got deeper into customer discovery and customer insights and all that stuff. So I'm super excited to dive into your framework today because this is an area, just sort of like selfishly, that I feel I have a little less experience when it comes to product marketing. And I think a lot of product marketers are similar, right? Where maybe they're good writers or good content creators, or they're from a product background, right? And they know how to launch products, or they come from a sales background, but really understanding how to go deep with your customers and understand their needs, and then turn that into content and launch material and messaging and positioning and all that stuff is really an art. And I'm excited to see your craft here today.
Okay, so I'm gonna share it.
Roxanne says,
Okay.
yes, product market fit, baby. Absolutely.
um, Okay, can you guys all see the template? I
Yes.
can't. Okay.
Yeah, sorry. We were putting thumbs up, but we're on mute.
Yeah, I've only got one screen, so I can't see you. Okay. So I'm just gonna start walking through the template and just shout questions at me as I go. So before I even start walking through it, I do just want to like explain how this came about. And it's basically because, you know, like there's a lot of steps to this process of interviewing customers and then understanding the insights and then taking those insights and turning it into some kind of marketing collateral or feeding it onto a different team, whether it's product team or customer success or sales, and like doing something with it. And there's a lot of steps to this process, and it's sort of easy to kind of like freeze and be like overwhelmed and I don't know how to start. And I really just wanted to put it together in an easy way. And it's something that had been sort of sitting in my head for years. I was like, I know there's a way that I could just put this into a spreadsheet and it'll be so good. And anyway, I finally did it about like a couple months ago. I just sort of formalized the process that I had been using and made it more accessible for other people to use, sort of took it out of my head, put it into a spreadsheet so that people could use the same process. So I'm really excited to share it because it's something that had been sitting in my head for years. So, okay. Having said that, I just want to the thing with customer interviews, one of the challenges is that very often no one is asking for a customer interview. In other words, you don't have sales knocking down your door and saying, hey, product marketing, we really need a customer interview right now. You usually don't have like the VP marketing saying that. Like they're usually asking for other things. And the trick is to know that the best way to get to a lot of those other things is through customer interviews. So sales may not be asking for a customer interview, but they might well be asking for a case study. They might be asking for ROI metrics. The VP marketing might not be asking for a customer interview, but they might be asking for positioning and messaging. And all those things are things that you can access by interviewing customers. So I just want to sort of set up where this template is thinking about. This is sort of actually the last tab on the template. So I wanted to just sort of start here to frame it and then move backwards. If you can see here, there's we're insight labels, because these are just a few of the use cases of how you can use the customer insights. So you can see they're color coded, competitive intel, differentiators, industry, pains, problems, and goals, product benefits, ROI, and testimonials. This is not an exhaustive list, right? There's other things that you could do with it, but I broke out some of these like main elements so that this is something to keep in mind even from the beginning, even before you're interviewing the customer, to keep in mind like what do you want to do with it, because it really helps internally to align with like your other stakeholders so that they know like, oh, we need competitive intel, and they may not think about the right way to do it is to speak to customers, but actually it's a great way to get competitive intel. So this is like a way to sort of keep that in mind at the beginning and align with stakeholders before you even start. Okay, any questions on that so far before I move to the next section? Okay. And by the way, these are all available. This whole template and is available in the PMM Jetpack. If you're not familiar with it, Jason Oakley's PMM Jetpack, great resource, lots of playbooks and templates, and this is accessible through there.
Yeah, maybe George, you can drop a link to that in the comments on LinkedIn.
Okay, I'm now showing a different template. This is, and then I'm going to go back to the customer insight. So I'm jumping around a little bit just to give you like the overview, the overall picture of what the process looks like. So this template is actually a customer interview pipeline, because the first hurdle is often just getting started, like with any big project. And one of the issues with getting started, on one of them, like we already said, is no one's asking you for it. But another issue is that usually the product marketer doesn't own the customer relationship. So it becomes a little bit tricky. Like, well, I don't own the customer relationship. Do I want to step on, the toes of the CS team or the sales team? So this pipeline template is a way to make it a more organized process so that you're working collaboratively with the other team. So let's say the customer relationship owner is the customer success team, as in many cases it is. This would be a shared template with them, and they can even be filling out part of it, because the idea is that they know the customers better than you at this point because you haven't started interviewing them yet. So they know like who is a customer that would be a good candidate for you to speak to, who's like excited about the product, who gave us a good NPS score, who has a really interesting use case, who has a use case that fits really well into our ICP. They're really our ideal customers. So they're able to give you that information, and then they can kind of fill that in like in the first few columns. So they could fill in like the basics of who the customer is, who owns the relationship internally. So it might be the name of the customer success manager. And then you could see there's a column here, column C, for ICP. So that's, for ideal customer profile. And the reason that's there is because when a use case for customer interviews, whether it's the main thing that you're trying to get out of it or it's kind of like a side benefit, is understanding who your real ideal customer is and, what their real customer needs are. And a lot of times a company will have customers that don't all necessarily fall under the ICP. Ideally, they're only selling to your ideal customers, but practically, a lot of times, like a startup will start off by selling to the founder's friends, and they may not be the ideal customer. In fact, at the beginning, the startup might not know who the ideal customer is. So if you already have a sense of who the ideal customer is, it's really important to understand that even before you start interviewing them, understand if they fit into those parameters. And that may require sort of talking internally about what those parameters are. So for instance, the column might not say ICP. Maybe it says, are they a small medium business? Are they in the real estate industry, or whatever industry you're targeting, whatever size company you're targeting, however you're defining your ideal customer. It's important to know that, because people who are in the same bucket, like they're the same type of customer, will give you different types of answers than people who are not your ideal customer. And what's dangerous about listening too closely to customers is if you don't know if they're your ideal customer and you listen too hard, right? You take everything they say super seriously, but actually they're not your ideal customer, then you might sort of be leading the product in the wrong direction. So you want to understand, are they your ideal customer? Are they not? And those are the main people that you want to be interviewing. Also, if you're not sure who the ideal customer is, then you might want to be looking at people in different categories. So if you're not sure, you want to be looking at people who are in a few different industries, and then you could fill that in column D, or several different company sizes, and you could fill that in column E. So it's really just like kind of a project management spreadsheet. It could be done in a spreadsheet. It could be done on, Monday.com or Asana or whatever you're using. But it's just a way to sort of work collaboratively. Any questions on that before I go back to the customer insights template?
Yeah, Shauna, I have one question. Yeah. So we had Drew Giovanali on the Office Hours a couple of weeks ago talking about win-loss. And one of the things that he shared that I thought was quite interesting was that the hardest part in win-loss interviews is actually recruiting and getting people to like agree to them. I'm curious, when it comes to maybe customer discovery more broadly, or in other areas, like you said, whether it be ROI, getting metrics for ROI, or insights for a new product or sales collateral. Do you find that also to be the case, is recruiting hard? And do you have any advice on how maybe to make it easier, or, do you incentivize customers in a certain way? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so I think this is where the collaboration comes in. And that's why the collaborative pipeline is so important, because as a product marketer, I'm probably not going to know that on my own. And that's one of the reasons that it's so important to be working with other teams, both to get their buy-in from the beginning, make sure you're aligned on the goals, And also make sure that you're speaking, like the right customers to speak to, because it's the customer relationship owner that's going to know that best. And in some startups, that might be sales, and some it might be CS. And I would say that like that's really the key to recruiting them, because they're the ones that have that information. Like, you ask any customer success manager, they'll be able to tell you the customers that are super excited about your product. Like, they know, it's just they don't have to even think about it, right? Like, they just know that if they're doing any kind of like NPS scores or any other kind of customer satisfaction, they can look who's the highest scores. That's like your low hanging fruit. So sometimes you might be doing win loss, and you also want to speak to people who churned, and you might be looking for other parameters. But like, if you want to just like start with your low hanging fruit, that's really the easiest to get, is the people who are already excited about your product, and they want to talk about it, they love it, right? Like, that's what I've found. I think if you're in a company where no one likes the product, you've got a different
bigger
problem.
issues.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Okay, I'm gonna go back to the
While you're
tutorial.
jumping, there looks like one more question that just came in from Pedro. How do you merge customer insights with insights from sales reps?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it sort of depends on the goal. So like when you're talking to customers, you can kind of classify what they're saying by like how you want to use it. Like, oh, they're talking now about competitive, they're talking about a core differentiator, I'm going to tag that. And if you want to use the same kind of insights template for like, say, recorded sales calls or insights from sales reps, you can use the same tagging system. So for instance, maybe a sales rep just went to a conference, a trade show, and they come back and they give you like intel about competitive intel. You could use the same system and just tag that as competitive intel, and by interviewing name, instead of having like the name of someone at a startup, you put the name of a salesperson. I've also been at companies that have a separate system for that. We had like just a form, I think it was like a Monday form or something, where like the solutions people would fill that in after conferences, or they'd fill in if there was any like competitive insights, or a Slack channel. Like, there's a lot of different ways to gather the information, but you could definitely use this template to put it all in one place.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to move backwards to actually the first tab, which is where we start talking about the interview questions. And the thing with interviews, I'll tell you like what people often tell me, and what I've often seen, is that they think that when they're going into it, they first need a checklist of questions, right? Like, because you want to be prepared for an interview. So in a sense, it makes sense. Like, okay, I want to be prepared, so I'm going to prepare like a list of questions. Or someone told me like, I just go into ChatGPT and ChatGPT gives me my list of questions. Like, okay, either way. And there's something to that. Like, you want to be thinking about it in advance, but I would say it's actually a pitfall, like a danger zone, if you get too stuck on your list of questions. Because if you're just reading from a checklist when you have a customer interview, it's probably not going to be a very good interview, because as the questioner, you're going to be focused on getting to the next question and finishing with one question and moving on, because it's a checklist, right? Like, you're okay, answered, asked and answered, next, asked and answered, next. Okay, I got through my whole list. But the problem is that, and this is what I learned when I was in journalism and interviewing people on all sorts of topics for just for like news stories and features and whatever, the first answer is it's just the thing that comes like off the top of someone's head, and it's often very general, it's often vague. It's not a good answer usually. It's very like, if you think about it, like you ask someone, oh, how do you like using our product? And they're like, oh yeah, it's great, I love it. at first glance, it sounds good. Oh, I got good feedback about our product. They love it. Okay, but at the end of the day, if that's all you got about the product, then it's really shallow. It's really superficial. That's like the first layer. And when I was in journalism school, so I had a journalism professor that always told us when you interview someone, you have to be peeling the onion. It's not enough to just take off the first layer. You need to keep going, peel the onion, ask more questions, ask another question, ask another question. You're trying to get to the heart of the matter. And that's where like the gold digging comes in, right? Like you're trying to, get the gold nuggets. Because like that first answer is just often very superficial. And so the way to get to the gold and the good answer is really through follow-up questions and not through sticking to a checklist. So that's why I actually structure this template in that way, where it's not a checklist of questions. It's actually separated into starter questions and then follow-up questions. And if you see the framing, it talks about the problem, the goal, the competition, and then the solution. And if you notice, the solution is only like a quarter of it, right? Because actually, you don't want to start from how they're using the product, because you're really starting in the middle of the story when you do that. When really what you want is to understand the whole buyer story and the customer journey from before they even realized, before they knew who you were. Because who are the customers that you want to bring in? They're the ones who are at that point that your customer was then when they were making that decision and they didn't know who you were and they just realized that they had a problem. Those are exactly the people that you want to reach, the other people who are just like them and don't even, haven't heard of you yet. You want to know how to make them realize they have a problem, how to make them realize that they need a solution, how to make them choose you over other solutions. And so you want to bring that information out of the customer that you're speaking to. And you can't do that if you just start with how they're using the product now, because you have to take them back to that mindset of like, okay, let's go back a little bit. Maybe it's a year, maybe it's a few months, but like, let's go back to before you even started using the product. And then you start getting them talking to like about, what was the problem you were trying to solve? What made you realize that your existing solution, wasn't good enough to solve that? And then as they talk about it, don't jump to the next question on the checklist, right? That's the danger point. That's the minefield you want to avoid. Instead, keep asking follow-up questions to dig out, to peel the next layer, to get more detail about that. So, you might say something like, could you walk me through that process? Could you give me an example? How would that work exactly? And once you do that, it gets people to give you those details that really bring it to life in a way that you don't get with that first superficial answer that tends to be very general and very like, oh yeah, great, it's going great. So you really want to be constantly like following up on that thread rather than rushing off to the next checklist question. And then only when you've started to get the customer to go through that journey, explain what goal they were trying to reach and why it was so important, what impact it has on their business. But like these are the core things that you really want to understand, because once you understand those things, that's exactly what's going to help you reach the next prospect that's in those same shoes. And they also have that goal, and it's also important for them. And getting into that mindset, that's the gold. That's exactly what you want to know, so that you can then use that in order to speak to the next prospect so that it resonates with them. And then only towards the end of the conversation do I even start going into the solution. And as part of the journey, when you do it this way, getting competitive intelligence actually becomes natural and organic, because if you think about the journey, right, like they're first talking about the problem, then they're talking about like we started looking for solutions. It's only natural for people to start talking about what kind of solutions they were looking for. And then, sometimes they just need a little bit of a nudge and, oh yeah, and what were the other solutions you were looking for? And then boom, before you know it, you've got all the dirt. And it's not something you don't want to start right off the bat with that, because like sometimes it could be sensitive. But often once they start talking about it, it just kind of flows naturally, and you can get really interesting information, because these are the people who either were using a competitive product before at a different company, maybe, or they were checking out your competitors and they got their pitches, like a month ago or 2 months ago or whatever. They could tell you exactly what they're saying, and they could tell you why they chose you over those other products. Like that's amazing information. That's exactly the information you want. So don't skip over understanding the whole journey before they even got to your product, because that's where a lot of the most important information actually lies. Any questions on this tab?
Just real quick, is there something usually that you're looking for, or an indicator? Maybe it's verbal, maybe it's an expression that somebody makes, or a way they react that makes you sort of realize, you know what, I got to listen in here because this is an insight that's really going to push the needle for us. Any sort of like tells that you look out for?
Yeah. So the ROI metrics, basically like anything that's a comparison. I'm always listening for a comparison. So if they start saying, they're talking about the problem, and they say, oh yeah, it was taking me a really long time to do this. Or yeah, it was costing us a lot of money to do this because we were, hiring like an external company to do it for us, and it was eating up our whole budget. um, when I hear that, when I hear like that before and after comparison, I always want to dig in and say, "Oh, can you tell me a little more about that? Like when you say it was time consuming, about how long did it take? Was it like one day a month, one day a quarter?" And maybe they'll say, "No, it was one day a week, like a whole day a week." Or maybe it was one or two people who are working on it one day a week. And then you can kind of understand, like, then you might ask them, and how long does it take you now using the product? And they'll be like, oh yeah, we get that information in 5 minutes. And then all of a sudden all you have to do is like compare those numbers, and like you've got an amazing ROI metric, because you dug in a little further once you heard that like before scenario, and you dug into the before scenario to get those details, and then you dug into the after scenario, and now you could kind of go back after the interview and be like, okay, so sometimes you have to make some extrapolations, right? Like maybe like, it's, let's assume it's this many hours in a working day, or sometimes you might be looking at like average salary is, let's assume it's whatever. But you can build a metric out of that you wouldn't be able to if you just stopped at like, yeah, it took us a lot of time. Stop, right? You got nothing, right? All you have is that general like vague statement. So as soon as they say something like that, I try to dig in and say, oh yeah, like how much time? And they usually don't know that off the top of their head. Like if you were to ask someone, oh, like what's their ROI on using our product? It's pretty rare that they'll know that off the top of their head. And they might even say like, oh, we have no idea. We don't track that. But actually, once you start talking to them and then you ask these follow-up questions, they actually do know it. They just don't even know they know it. And your job is to bring it out of them. So yeah, that's something I listen for.
Awesome. I'm looking at the time and I'm going, boy, this has really gone by super fast. And I know we want to respect your schedule, but just for the folks out there, if you have any other final questions, Shoshana, maybe we can, I don't know, I know this lives perpetually on LinkedIn. Maybe for the folks out there, we can keep an eye out for any additional questions. I know that I had a ton of questions that you answered, and one of the things that I think about is just really double clicking, right? Not just going through the questions. And I think this is why we also need like still humans, right? Like AI can only do so much, because it's like one of the questions that came to mind was like, well, how do you know someone is just not uh a kind of like they call it the yes man, right? Like, yes, everything's cool, and they're just being kind, right? Like sometimes people are just they're not really wanting to kind of tell you that that your thing is not that awesome, right? And they're not really giving you that genuine feedback just to avoid conflict, and maybe like there's no upside for them to do that. Sometimes, right? I'm not sure that that's the case, all the time, for, certainly, but I think that's where the human comes in to discern and to think and to not just follow like logical rules, but start to feel it out and go, oh, okay, let me dive a little deeper. Joe, just for the folks out there.
Yeah, and I think that's also where getting them talking about the customer journey, it's actually a good way to get them past those first like superficial answers. Because if you just jump into the product, you're like, how do you like the product? How do you like this feature? Yeah, great. you
Yeah.
know, I use it every day, or I go into it once a week. Yeah, it works. Okay, thanks. Right. But if they start talking about their problems, which actually that's what you really want to know, you want to know about their problems, and you start being like, like, why did you even need a solution? What were you doing before?
Yeah.
And then they start telling you the story. Once people start talking, they often want to be telling, this is the story of their work life that they're in at least 8 hours a day, right? Like they want to talk, so you just have to get them to start talking.
We got a question on LinkedIn, or a request. Can you please do another one of these soon? So I think everybody really enjoyed this today. I think, it sounds like where we really got into today is, how to build a pipeline, how to ask questions, how to dig deeper and really get to the core of those insights. So maybe if we do another one of these soon, we can focus a little bit more on how to apply those
Yeah.
insights, right? I think that's the other side of the coin. And we probably should have known that going in, that this is like a really meaty topic, and we'd probably only be able to cover a certain aspect of it. And I think the obvious starting point is how to, build that pipeline and frame those questions and get the right insights. Now let's, next time we'll dive into how to take those insights and turn them into ROI metrics on your website or sales collateral that the sales team will actually use and all that good stuff.
Yeah,
Totally.
happy to come back.
And Lauren, thank you so much. I can see there's something up with the LinkedIn API here, but I do see your profile natively on LinkedIn. Thank you so much. You should absolutely follow Shoshana as well on LinkedIn. She's constantly posting super valuable pieces of content and insights. So definitely do that. I guess we'll go ahead and wrap up for the day, and then we'll talk about some subsequent content. First of all, to our expert guest, Shoshana Kordova, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you for your insights. For the folks out there, definitely check out Peel Product Marketing. You can do so by checking it out on LinkedIn. Of course, if there were other channels, are there any sort of other URLs or links that, Shoshana, they should go to?
Well, I mean, I do use AssetMule as my one pager.
I think on
But
LinkedIn, on your profile, you have
yeah,
an
you
asset
can
mule
find
asset,
it.
right?
You can find both the customer insights template and my AssetMule one pager on my LinkedIn. So just go to my LinkedIn; everything's there. Yeah.
Definitely. Awesome. And we all love LinkedIn. For the folks out there who have really been able to, oh great, we got some more feedback. Okay, the API is working now. Yay. Yeah. Yael, thank you so much. We'd love to put together so a part 2 and dive in. So for all you folks, again, thank you so much for joining us here today. If you're not an AssetMule user, check it out. It's free. You can go to assetmule.ai. If you're an existing user, thank you so much. If you love the content and want more, go ahead and click on subscribe here on YouTube or follow on LinkedIn. We're constantly trying to inspire and educate folks out there with our content, so really appreciate it. And without further ado, have a wonderful day. Thank you. Okay, Roxanne, you got Shoshana, you got some fans here. Thank you so much. Top notch. Awesome. Yes, she is top notch. Awesome. Well, have a great day.
Man. Bye. It was great.